The drive up to Whispering Pines was longer than I remembered. I'd been there once as a child with my parents, a brief weekend getaway that had left only vague memories of a serene lake and tall, swaying pines. Now, as an adult seeking solitude, I thought it would be the perfect escape from my hectic life. The pressures of work, the strain of relationships, they all seemed distant as I pulled into the nearly empty campsite. It was early afternoon, and the sun was high in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the dense canopy above. I chose a spot near the lake, close enough to hear the gentle lapping of water against the shore, but far enough to avoid the mosquito swarms. Setting up camp was routine, pitching the tent, unrolling the sleeping bag, and arranging my gear. I was alone, and the silence was comforting. As the sun dipped lower, I started a fire. The crackling flames and the scent of burning wood brought a sense of nostalgia. I cooked a simple meal, savoring the peace and quiet. With dusk settling in, I decided to explore the area, hoping to recapture some of those childhood memories. The forest was beautiful, the tall pines whispering secrets to each other in the breeze. I wandered along a path that seemed vaguely familiar, leading me deeper into the woods. The light began to fade, and with it, the sounds of nature changed. Birds fell silent, and the rustling of small creatures grew more pronounced. I should have turned back, but curiosity kept me going. Then I saw it. A cabin, barely visible through the trees. It was old and weathered, its wooden frame sagging with age. I hadn't remembered this from my childhood. Intrigued, I approached it. The door was slightly ajar, creaking open with a nudge. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay and neglect. The dim light from the setting sun barely penetrated the dusty windows, casting eerie shadows. I stepped inside, feeling an inexplicable chill. The cabin was a single room, furnished with a rickety table and a few chairs. In the corner, an old iron stove stood cold and unused. On the table lay a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. I couldn't resist picking it up. The handwriting was spidery and difficult to read, but I managed to decipher some of it. The entries were dated over 50 years ago, written by a man named Jacob. He spoke of the isolation of the cabin, his love for the solitude, and his encounters with strange happenings in the woods. As I read on, the entries grew more unsettling. Jacob wrote of whispers in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. A sudden noise outside startled me. I froze, straining to hear. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest. I set the journal down and moved to the door, peering out into the growing darkness. There was nothing there, just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I must have imagined it. I decided it was best to head back to my camp before it got too dark. As I walked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. The path seemed longer than before, the trees closing in around me. By the time I reached my camp, the sky was a deep indigo, stars beginning to twinkle above. I stoked the fire, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me. The journal had been fascinating, but it had also unsettled me. I couldn't get Jacob's words out of my head. The whispers in the night. I tried to reassure myself that it was just an old man's imagination. The night was still and quiet, the only sounds the crackling fire and the gentle waves of the lake. I decided to turn in, hoping for a good night's sleep to shake off the eerie feeling. As I lay in my tent, the forest seemed to come alive with sounds. The whispering of the pines took on a more sinister tone, and the sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. I don't know how long I lay there, wide awake, before I heard it. A whisper, clear and distinct, right outside my tent. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. Trembling, I strained to hear more. There it was again, a soft, unintelligible murmur. Summoning all my courage, I unzipped the tent and peered out. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint glow. Shadows danced around the campsite. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the light, just beyond the dying fire's reach. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by darkness. "Hello!" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, only the continued whispering. I stepped out of the tent, my flashlight in hand. I pointed it toward the figure, but the beam seemed to falter, barely illuminating the spot where it stood. The figure didn't move. Panic surged through me. I backed away, nearly tripping over my gear. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was all around me now, a cacophony of voices speaking in hushed tones. I stumbled back into my tent, zipping it up and clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The whispering continued, rising to a fever pitch. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was inside my head, echoing through my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ceased. The silence was deafening. I lay there, panting and drenched in sweat, too terrified to move. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. When I awoke, the sun was rising, casting a golden light over the campsite. The terror of the night before felt distant, like a bad dream. I cautiously emerged from the tent, half expecting to see the figure still standing there, but there was nothing. The forest was calm and quiet, the lake shimmering peacefully. I packed up quickly, eager to leave Whispering Pines behind. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In the rearview mirror, the tall pines seemed to close ranks, hiding whatever secrets they held. I never went back to Whispering Pines. The journal I found in the cabin haunted me for years, a constant reminder of that night. I often wondered what had happened to Jacob, what he had seen and heard in those woods. Part of me wished I had taken the journal with me, but another part was relieved to leave it behind. Even now, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, the whispering still echoing in my ears. The pines may be far away, but their secrets follow me, a shadow I can't escape. I'd always loved the idea of a solo camping trip. The idea of being one with nature, away from the relentless grind of city life, sounded perfect. When I found an old, barely used trail leading to Blackwood Ridge, I knew it was the place for me. The ridge was said to be haunted, but I didn't believe in ghost stories. I wanted adventure, not superstition. I packed light, a tent, a sleeping bag, some food, and a few essentials. The drive out to Blackwood Ridge took most of the morning. As I drove, the scenery changed from urban sprawl to dense forests, the road narrowing and becoming more rugged. I finally reached the trailhead by early afternoon. The hike up the ridge was beautiful. The trees were tall and ancient, their leaves creating a green canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds sang, and the air was crisp and clean. I was in my element. After a few hours of hiking, I reached a clearing near the top of the ridge. The view was breathtaking. The forest stretched out below me, a sea of green, with the occasional rocky outcrop breaking through the canopy. I set up camp, pitching my tent near the edge of the clearing, and settled in for the evening. As dusk fell, I built a small fire and cooked a simple meal. The forest grew quiet, the sounds of day giving way to the stillness of night. I felt a sense of peace, the stress of city life melting away. I decided to explore a bit before it got too dark. Leaving the fire crackling merrily, I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the trees. The forest at night was a different world. Shadows loomed larger, and every sound seemed amplified. I wandered for a while, enjoying the solitude, until I stumbled upon something unexpected, a cabin. It was old and weathered, nestled among the trees as if trying to hide. I hadn't seen it on my way up, and curiosity got the better of me. I approached the cabin cautiously. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay. The cabin was a single room, furnished with a rickety table, a few chairs, and an old iron stove. On the table lay a dusty journal, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was barely legible, but I could make out some of it. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel, who had lived here decades ago. He wrote about his love for the solitude of the ridge and his encounters with strange phenomena, voices in the night, shadows moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. A sudden noise outside startled me. I turned, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing, just the trees and the encroaching darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. I closed the journal and left the cabin, heading back to my camp with an uneasy feeling. The fire was still burning when I returned, casting a comforting glow. I tried to shake off the eerie feeling from the cabin and focused on the warmth of the fire. As the night deepened, I crawled into my tent, hoping for a good night's sleep. I woke to a strange sound in the middle of the night. It was a soft, whispering noise, like the wind rustling through the leaves, but more deliberate. I lay still, listening. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It seemed to be coming from all around me, inside and outside the tent. My heart pounded as I unzipped the tent and peered out. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint, flickering light. Shadows danced around the campsite, and then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the light's reach. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by darkness. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The whispering stopped abruptly. The figure didn't move. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the figure, but the beam seemed to falter, barely illuminating the spot where it stood. Fear surged through me. I backed away, tripping over my gear and falling to the ground. The whispering started again, louder and more insistent. It was all around me now, a chorus of voices speaking in hushed tones. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the tent, zipping it up and huddling inside, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The whispering continued, rising to a fever pitch. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was inside my head, echoing through my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ceased. The silence was deafening. I lay there, panting and drenched in sweat, too terrified to move. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. When I awoke, the sun was rising, casting a golden light over the campsite. The terror of the night before felt distant, like a bad dream. I cautiously emerged from the tent, half expecting to see the figure still standing there, but there was nothing. The forest was calm and quiet, the view from the ridge as beautiful as ever. I packed up quickly, eager to leave Blackwood Ridge behind. As I hiked down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. The cabin and the journal haunted me, the whispers echoing in my mind. By the time I reached my car, I was exhausted and on edge. I drove away, glancing back at the ridge in my rearview mirror. The trees seemed to close ranks, hiding whatever secrets they held. I never went back to Blackwood Ridge. The memories of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of the unknown. Even now, in the safety of my apartment, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, the whispering still echoing in my ears. The ridge may be far away, but its shadows follow me, a haunting presence I can't escape. The crackling of the campfire was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the dark woods. We were deep in the heart of the forest, far from any signs of civilization. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance to disconnect and enjoy nature. Little did we know, nature had other plans for us. My friends and I, a a group of 5, had set up our tents near a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. The shadows cast by the flickering fire danced ominously on the bark, creating shapes that seemed to move when you looked away. Despite our attempts at light-hearted conversation, a sense of unease lingered in the air. As night fell completely, the forest seemed to come alive with mysterious noises. Branches creaked overhead as if disturbed by unseen hands, and the rustling of leaves sounded like whispers carried on the wind. We laughed nervously, blaming our jitters on the spooky stories we had shared earlier. Then, things started to happen that we couldn't explain. At first, it was subtle, a snapped twig in the distance, shadows darting between the trees. But soon, it became more unsettling. One of our flashlights went missing, and strange symbols appeared etched into the tree trunks near our campsite. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a prank or our imaginations running wild, but the growing tension among us betrayed our fears. On the second night, things took a sinister turn. I woke to the sound of footsteps padding around our tents. My heart raced as I listened intently, but the steps abruptly ceased. Fear crawled up my spine like 1,000 tiny insects. When I dared to peek out, I saw nothing but the dense darkness pressing against the thin veil of our campfire's light. As the hours ticked by, we huddled together, each of us trying to stay awake, afraid of what lurked beyond the reach of our fire's glow. The forest seemed to press in closer, suffocating us with its presence. Every rustle and crackle became a potential threat, every shadow a hiding place for unseen eyes. Just before dawn, a blood-curdling scream shattered the fragile peace. We scrambled out of our tents, hearts pounding in our chests, only to find one of our friends missing. All that remained were torn shreds of fabric and a trail of blood leading into the darkness of the forest. Panic consumed us as we searched frantically, calling out into the silent void of the trees. Hours passed in a blur of terror and despair until we stumbled upon a clearing unlike any we had seen before. In its center stood a circle of stones, ancient and weathered, with symbols we couldn't comprehend carved into their surfaces. In the middle of the circle lay our friend, unconscious and covered in strange marks. We carried him back to camp, our minds reeling with unanswered questions. Who or what had done this? What did those symbols mean? And why had we been targeted? As the sun finally rose, casting its feeble light over our shaken group, we made a solemn pact to leave the forest behind. Whatever malevolent force dwelled there was beyond our understanding, and we knew we were lucky to have escaped with our lives. To this day, the memory of that camping trip haunts me. I often find myself staring into the flickering flames of a fire, wondering if the darkness beyond holds secrets best left undisturbed.